What's your connection to Connemara? Why do you keep coming over?
My mother was born in Lavelle, which is a small village in northwest Connemara, and she left there in the 40s to live and work in London. She never lost touch with the place. When we were kids, we used to go back on a fairly regular basis for family holidays, and then I got to a point where you stopped going anywhere with your parents on holiday. I didn't visit the place for several years. Then I went back as an adult and saw the place through adult eyes, which is kind of a revelation because I'd taken it all for granted before, as you do when you're a kid. And came back and looked at the place and thought, oh my God, it's amazing. So ever since then, I've been coming back as often as I can, 2, 3, sometimes 4 times a year last year, which is great. And that is my connection with Connemara. Well, I live in London and I work in the heart of London for the BBC at BBC Broadcasting House. This can be a fairly pressurised job, lots of deadlines, and just travelling to and from work is a job in itself sometimes, with the transport system and the number of people that you have to deal with. It can be quite difficult, and in the end you just like head down, you're blinkered, you're just going straight to work and you're coming home again. You don't really appreciate that you live in London, even though it's a fantastic city and people come from thousands of miles to be there. When you actually live and work there, it just wears you down. So to actually be able to come away to Connemara for a break is just brilliant, because it's quite easy to get there and you can be there in a couple of hours, and the contrast is fairly well marked, as you can imagine.
How long are you back in Connemara for this time?
Only 4 days, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Just came back to see Martin Finkley play a rushing dove and try and take in some of this to recharge the old batteries. Take back to London with me. Till the next time. Northwest Connemara is my favourite place generally, but I love it when I come back and you drive into the Valley and you kind of really know, God, this is really Connemara, and you get to Carlmore and you turn left and head towards Lavelle where the family connection lies. And then once I'm in that area, I generally don't budge too far. I mean, I'm obviously going to Clifton for the pubs, and my favourite being Vaughan's at the moment, but that could all change next time, you never know. And Moyard is a really nice place for me, although a lot of people will say none of this is, strictly speaking, classic Connemara country, but for me it is, because that's where I grew up, or spent a lot of time in my youth. So for me, these are my favourite places. That's an aunt and an uncle in the distance there. The Derryenver walk from Derryenver Pier along there, because you can look back in towards the 12 bends across Ballinakil. That's fantastic. Renville Peninsula I particularly like, and Cleggan. I mean, I like Cleggan, even though it's quite different. That's one of my favourite ports as well, and yeah, I mean they're the main places. My great uncle in the middle there, and he was apparently a giant of a man. He was 6'6". His mother, my great grandmother, is on his left there, and he's the man that built the house they're standing in front of, that I eventually spent holidays in. It's a much later shot, still in front of the house that we used to stay in, and that's my great uncle. There's these people around him, obviously, who care for him a lot, and he was apparently quite a character, musician, comedian, and generally larger than life character. Well, sadly, the place seems quite abandoned and neglected now, which is a shame because my memories of this place are being overrun with people and people coming and going all the time. That's the way it goes in a lot of places around here. Well, this is a building that anyone who's driven through Letterfrack will be familiar with. It was built as a store and a shop a long time ago. It's been a ruin since my mother was here, and apparently what happened was the project was undermined when the Quakers built their own store as part of their restoration project in Letterfrack up there in the village, which is now the Bard's Den, and this place was kind of undermined and made redundant. So it's actually been derelict as you see it for a hell of a long time, and it was never actually lived in. This again is a long, what's called Sea Road, coming out of Letterfrack, and then they're lounging around on a bridge, and if you were to stand there today you'd probably get killed because the traffic comes round there at a terrible pace. But they're just standing there leisurely having a chat, probably seeing who comes along, and you just can't do that now. I mean, it's difficult to even walk along that road, you just take your life in your hands. And this is the same location but taken on the opposite side of the road. And there they are, actually sitting on a seat waiting to see who comes along. This one I think is great. It's unusual to get pictures like this that aren't posed, but that's my grandfather and that's my cousin Sean. I know exactly where it was taken, on the edge of Barnyarig Bay. It's just such a nice picture, and there's kind of the two generations there, the old Connemara and the new Connemara.
How do you stay in touch with people in Connemara? Do you use the websites? Do you use the net?
It sounds odd, but before it was quite difficult to get any kind of information from Connemara. Just with the cousins and conventional mail and the odd telephone call. Because when you're abroad, even the mundane stuff is actually interesting, but when you're actually living there, it isn't. So with the advent of websites and email, etc., that's been a real godsend, especially for the train spotterish likes of myself, who are just obsessed with the minutiae of Connemara life. Borderline autistic, I call it. But obviously the Connemara net is definitely the main starting point for anyone, and from there I've built up quite a good collection of friends now, simply through that, which is amazing. People that I would never have met just through conventional visits to Connemara. I used to come across as a foot passenger, and I used to take the best part of 24 hours or more from Victoria coach station, travel through the night into North Wales, cross on the ferry, turn up in Letterfrack the following evening. Used to do it, but I wouldn't fancy doing it now. It's horrendously expensive as well. The worst part was just thinking about going back. But I would still go, definitely, but I wouldn't be paying the exorbitant fares that you pay for British Airways and that. I'd just go back to the overland route. Some of my relatives did that journey overland, so they're in their 80s. And it just never occurred to them how hard it was, because there's this kind of incredible homing instinct that people have when they're just going home. And I had two aunts in fact, that did that journey at least once a year for years until they were very old. They never once complained about it because they were just so enthusiastic about going back. And in some ways, I mean, it's nice to be there in a couple of hours, but it takes you a couple of days to get used to the fact that you're there. Whereas when you were travelling overland, you really appreciated the amount of distance you were travelling and the way things were changing. You meet people as you go.
What's that you having?
Veg, lovely, excellent, very nice. In the Bard's Den, Letterfrack.
Good stuff.
Cheers. What would life have been like had I been actually born there and not here? And the only conclusion I can come up with is that I will probably be living in London and working for the BBC. That's it.